The meeting of two friends, both set up to be leaders for life, showing off their vision of a post-American world order. The pomp and circumstance, a credibility boost for Russian leader Vladimir Putin, displaying that he's got a powerful friend in Chinese leader Xi Jinping, even as the International Criminal Court has a warrant for his arrest for committing war crimes and allegedly shipping Ukrainian children to Russia. And even as the West isolates him amid his stalled invasion of Ukraine. Both Xi and Putin writing glowing op-eds about their countries' relations. Xi calling their relationship an eternal friendship. Putin saying the two are standing shoulder to shoulder against America's increasingly aggressive efforts to deter Russia and China. Xi Jinping is trying to walk a delicate line, so far stopping short of providing lethal aid to Russia, though the U.S. says he may be considering it, while also refusing to condemn the invasion. Meanwhile, Beijing is also taking advantage of Russia's isolation. Trade between the two nations jumped to $190 billion last year, an increase of 30% from 2021, undercutting the impact of U.S.-led sanctions, as Chinese companies snap up cheap energy from Russia, giving the Kremlin key funds to finance the invasion. But Beijing wants the world to focus less on their friendship and more on Xi's role as a global statesman who can broker peace deals, like the historic deal he helped forge to restore relations between Saudi Arabia and Iran. I've been talking to people in this Hutong, this old Beijing residential alley, to get a sense of what Chinese people think about Xi Jinping's visit. This man tells me Xi's visit is good because it can further improve China-Russia relations. He says he likes Putin a lot because he's a cool, tough guy. On the Ukraine war, he says he just hopes everyone can have a peaceful relationship. This woman tells me she hopes Russia wins the war, but peace is best. Another woman says the war and loss of life is heartbreaking and painful to watch. She says it's wrong for America to send weapons to Ukraine, and she believes in Xi Jinping's vision of world peace. When I ask her what she thinks of Putin, she answers that he's righteous, decisive, swift, and tough. But when I follow up and ask if she's heard of the ICC issuing an arrest warrant for Putin, she responds, "I didn't know. He started the war after all. He should sit down with Zelensky and talk." This shoe repairman says, "Why are they fighting? It doesn't do anybody good." But we don't know who started the war, he adds. It's the Ukrainians, right? Xi doesn't need to convince the audience in China, where media is heavily censored, of the merits of his tight bond with Putin. But the rest of the world is watching to see what comes of Beijing's claims of neutrality. And Jake, Russia's state news agency said talks between Xi and Putin lasted for 4.5 hours. Chinese state media has been framing this visit as a trip for peace. And it's striking there how almost everyone I spoke to on the streets of Beijing echoed that perspective with very positive views of Putin. But you have to remember, that's because in China, social media in general, is heavily censored, so it's pretty much the only viewpoint most people can see. But look, the China-Russia relationship has historically been a tricky one, but their shared, growing adversarial relationship with the U.S.-led West is really driving Putin and Xi together. Jake.
Selena Wang in Beijing for us. Thank you so much. U.S. officials say that President Xi has yet to call Ukraine's President Volodymyr Zelensky, despite China's assertion that it wants to play a role as a peacemaker in the conflict between Ukraine and invading Russia. CNN's Ivan Watson is in Kharkiv, Ukraine for us. And Ivan, how has Ukraine responded to this meeting between Xi and Putin?
It's watching very closely, and I would add, probably nervously. As you pointed out, Ukraine, I think there's a lot of skepticism about whether or not Xi Jinping and the Chinese government are truly neutral, as they profess to be when it comes to this war. But they'd rather have China pretend to be neutral than actually full-throatedly offer weapons and ammunition to Ukraine's much larger enemy, Russia. So you've got statements coming out like the President Zelensky's office saying that supporting only the Russian side will not lead to the finalization of the war. The foreign ministry spokesperson saying, we expect Beijing to use its influence on Moscow to put an end to Russia's aggressive war against Ukraine. And another top security official saying that if China wants to fulfill its so-called peace plan for Ukraine, the first and foremost point is the surrender or withdrawal of Russian occupation forces from the territory of Ukraine. Also, a top Ukrainian intelligence official says that the Ukrainians are watching very closely the ammunition that they're capturing and noticing on the Russian side, on the front lines. And so far, they have seen no evidence of deliveries of Chinese arms to the Russian side. But again, they're watching this very closely.
And Ivan, this meeting between Xi and Putin comes on the same day that the European Union has agreed to provide more support for Ukraine on the front lines. Tell us about that.
That is sending an important message, not only to the Ukrainians, but arguably to the Russians and the Chinese leaders as they meet in Moscow. The European Union, 17 European countries plus Norway, announcing that they're going to ship 1 million rounds of 155 millimeter artillery ammunition to the Ukrainians, that they're going to try to put $1 billion into that effort, and then another €1 billion, into procuring more ammunition. The Ukrainians delighted with that, and that comes on top of the Biden administration announcing an additional $350 million in presidential drawdown funds. That's for ammunition for those HIMARS that the Ukrainians love, the long-distance missile launching systems, as well as howitzers, Bradley infantry fighting vehicles, HARM missiles, anti-tank weapons. And that's on top of earlier this month, hundreds of millions of dollars in U.S. presidential drawdown defense assistance. And that comes all on top of some $32 billion in defense aid that has come from the Biden administration. And just another country that's offered aid, small Norway, says it has now sent 8 Leopard 2 tanks to Ukraine. All of this is just trying to demonstrate that European countries, the West, the U.S., are supporting Ukraine in its battle against its much larger enemy with a much larger population. It's held the line so far, but it still needs help.
All right, Ivan Watson in Kharkiv, Ukraine, thank you so much.